Hi, I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in San Diego. Thank you so much for watching today. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, please consider making a contribution. Go to our website. It's easy to do. Thank you in advance for that contribution. So this is the first Sunday after Christmas. Christmas just a few days ago. I hope however you celebrated it, you were safe and that you felt some of the spirit of Christmas. I remember years ago reading an article by Unity Poet Laureate James Dillard Freeman, where he expressed the idea that there is nothing more un-Christmassy than the day or couple of days right after Christmas. And I used to think about that in a very different way than I do now. I used to think about it in terms of, all right, well, all the outer preparations are over, the gifts have been opened, be time to start thinking about taking down the tree and the decorations and all of that. But the more Christmases I have celebrated, the more I have found myself thinking about it very differently. That really the days after Christmas is when the work of Christmas really begins. The days after Christmas are the days in which the work of Christmas really begins. Because if we see Christmas as an invitation to understand the expression of spiritual principles and teachings that Jesus gave us, then we understand that it is a starting point and it is a time to put into deeper practice some of those teachings. I came across this piece, or actually it was sent to me a few days ago by one of our members, written by Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was a civil rights activist. He was a theologian, a philosopher, a writer, and he wrote about this idea of the work of Christmas happening right after Christmas. This is what he wrote. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flock, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among people, to make music in the heart. I think if we look out at our world today, we would agree that there is still much work to be done. There is still much work for each of us to do in order to really live out the message of Christmas. One of the things I've always been drawn to about Unity is its practicality and its application, that it is not just a set of beliefs, it's certainly not a set of creeds and dogma. It is a living practice that we take in the nitty-gritty of our lives. As I was thinking about this just the other day, trying to put into my own words, what is my real passion? What do I really care about? It became very simple to me that no matter what outer form it seems to have taken in my life, that what really matters to me, what I'm really passionate about, is making a positive difference. Whether it is through the Unity Center, whether it is in my family, whether it is in the places that I go or the things that I do, if I really step back and I really look at what is it that I care most deeply about, it is that. It is making a positive difference. And in more spiritual terms, we would say that that is the idea behind being a beneficial presence. To me, the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, Lord, make me an instrument, is all about that. It's all about being a beneficial presence. Perhaps of all of the prayers in Christendom, perhaps only second to the Lord's Prayer is this favored prayer. You just heard Mariah sing it beautifully. St. Francis was born in 1181. He lived till 1226. He's probably the best loved medieval Italian teacher, monk that there ever was. And his personal journey was a journey itself of inspiration. He was born into a wealthy family. His father had very clear visions for him of becoming a wealthy businessman. That was all his father cared about. And through the course of events of St. Francis's young life, and I'm not going to try to give you a history of his life right here, he had a turning point experience in which he turned his back on all of that and really wanted to live the gospel of Jesus Christ, to live it in the most simple and most clear and most powerful way. And these words that are attributed to him, because there are many today who believe they actually weren't written by St. Francis, but these words that are attributed to him, let me share them with you again. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying that we are born to eternal life. When we think about those words, they're very common, very simple words, right? Very simple. The message he is painting is a very clear, very simple invitation to live our lives in a particular way. In his prayer, whether he wrote it or someone else wrote it, doesn't really matter. But in this prayer are instructions on how we are to be, as well as instructions on what we are not to do, how we are to be, what we are not to do. The prayer is really an affirmation, if you think about it, a series of very short statements, any one of which we could take as a phrase, as a mantra, as an affirmation, to practice, to take it deeply into our heart and soul. It's an affirmation that we live up to the divine potential within us. One of the core principles, one of the core beliefs in unity is that of our divine nature. We recognize Jesus, the Christ, Jesus, our teacher and way shower, as an expression of the divine, fully expressing his divinity. But we also recognize that that same divinity resides in every single one of us, whether we acknowledge it, whether we know it, whether we live from it or not. That same spark, that same divinity resides within each one of us. But it is up to us to find a pathway forward, to live that out, and to live it out not only in those relationships and circumstances and times when it is easy to do so. You and I are living in times right now that are pretty challenging on many, many different levels. Every part of our life has been up-leveled. Every part of our life has been in a state of change ever since the beginning of the pandemic in March, right? And so we can say that certainly there are times that it's easy to practice and times that it's not. But whether it's easy or not never changes the necessity of practicing. The very word practice means that it is ongoing, that we keep doing it, and ideally we do it a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. You and I are here to live out our true identity, our identity that of one made in the image and after the likeness of God by whatever name we call God. And unlike any of the rest of creation, we have the power to choose. And that is the most important power, I think, that we have. The power to consciously choose how we're going to be in any given moment. the power to choose how we're going to respond in any given moment, the power to choose what we're going to say yes to or what we're going to say no to, the power to choose what we're going to support or what we're going to withdraw our support from. In St. Francis' prayer, he tells us very clearly how to be that instrument of peace. I love the very phrasing he uses, the idea of being an instrument. I love music, and one of the regrets of my life is that I never learned how to play an instrument. But I certainly admire and respect anyone and everyone who can and does. And I know the many, many hours of practice it takes to perfect the playing of any instrument. But out of it comes beautiful sounds that can lift us up and bring us joy or bring us a sense of wholeness and healing. And so I think it's just very significant that in this prayer, St. Francis uses the idea of being an instrument of these qualities. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. And so you and I are an instrument of peace when we sow love where there is hatred. We can certainly look in our world today, and we don't have to look very far, do we, to recognize the hatred, the anger, the animosity that is being expressed by far too many today. And so what does it look like for us in those times and circumstances to say, I'm not going to be part of that. Let me find a way to show love in this situation. Let me sow love where there is hatred. We are an instrument of peace where we show pardon where there is injury. Who around you is hurting? Who needs your help? What is the help that you might be able to give? And if you need to be helped, who might you turn to receive that? We are an instrument of peace where we sow faith, where there has been doubt. One of the most powerful experiences of my life was when a former ministerial mentor of mine helped me through a period of feeling very insecure and very afraid of whatever it was before me and just not believing in myself or that I could do whatever I needed to be doing. And he looked me squarely in the eye and he said, I know you don't believe, but do you believe that I believe you will make it through? And I remember blurting out to him, of course I believe that you believe that I will make it through. You are Jack Boland. And for those of you who knew who Jack Boland was, you would understand why I said it the way that I did. He was a pillar of a minister in the Unity movement, built one of the most successful ministries and work in our movement. And for him to look at me when I was so filled with doubt and say, well, you may doubt yourself, but do you believe that I believe? That question allowed me to change my perspective. We are an instrument of peace when we are willing to sow hope where there is despair. We need all of us to raise our voices and sing in unison a message of hope, not to say that we ignore the real hurt and despair and darkness and challenge that is around us. I don't believe that denying reality is ever right or healthy or helpful or spiritual. But I do also believe in the necessity of always painting a picture of hope. Hope is about a vision for the future. It builds upon or leaves behind the past and says there can be something better. If we believe in the presence and power of God as the presence and power of good, then we absolutely have every reason to be hopeful. But God is not going to do it for us. God can only do it through us. We are an instrument of peace when we sow joy where there is sadness. It's not that we shut down someone's sadness or deny their experience of grief, but at the same moment that we can be with them and recognize their sadness or acknowledge their grief, we gently help them to experience or to remember a moment of joy or the possibility of joy. Many say that we are living in some of the most challenging and dark times that that we've known for a very long time. And if our spiritual practice and message has ever had an application and has ever been needed, it is needed now, and not just as an individual experience. And by that I mean not just as each one of us doing our own little things so our life is better in our little bubble. It is to say, how can I take what I know to be true and extend it in such a way that goes beyond me and my bubble and those I immediately know, to make a difference in a wider circle? You probably can't see it because the camera is pointed at me, but above me is our mission statement: transforming lives and healing our world. And that very idea is what I'm talking about here, and what I think St. Francis was talking about. That we are to live our lives in a certain way that we become better individuals, but not just for the sake of being a better individual, but for the sake of making a better world for all of us. So in the beginning part of his prayer, St. Francis paints a very clear picture of how we are to be. And then in the second part of the prayer, it kind of shifts a bit. And he tells us what we are not to do. He says we are to seek to console rather than be consoled. Not to be consoled, but to seek to console. We may be hurting, we may be challenged, but can we keep our heart open to the other who may be hurting even more? To me, one of the greatest spiritual principles we can practice is a principle of perspective, which means no matter how much I am hurting right now, I bet there are those who are hurting even more. Can I seek to be a giver of consolation rather than only looking to be consoled myself? Seek to understand rather than to be understood. Some of you may have thought that those words or that idea first came from the best-selling author Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Because one of those habits he gives is a habit to seek to understand before being understood. But he did not originate that idea. He was or is a very deeply religious man of the Mormon faith. And so many of the principles in that great book that were our religious or spiritual principles that got mainstreamed, and I'm sure grateful for that. But St. Francis in his prayer, seek to understand rather than to be understood, probably didn't even originate with St. Francis. It's the idea of extending ourselves to the other first. Can I show you understanding? Can I try to understand the pain that you are dealing with, the challenge that you are facing? For me, one of the most powerful ways to get to forgiveness when forgiveness has been hard for me, and there have been situations in my life personally, in my family, where forgiveness has been incredibly hard to get to. And the bridge for me to get to forgiveness is the bridge of understanding. To be able to say, all right, yes, it is hard for me to forgive because what was done was so incredibly wrong and hurtful. But can I try to understand what was going on in and through that person so that maybe in the understanding, I can move to a place of forgiveness, as much for myself as it might ever be for the other. Seek to understand rather than to be understood. Seek to love rather than to be loved. Seek to love rather than to be loved. Jesus held love as the greatest commandment. He said, "They will know you are my students, my disciples, by how well you love each other." It's not about how well we are loved. Yes, it feels great to be loved, and I hope everyone listening has someone who loves and cherishes them. But the real journey is the journey of being the one willing to love. And the reward for loving is our own spiritual growth, and especially so when we make the effort to love the one that is prickly, when we make the effort to love the one that is sandpaper to our soul, when we make the effort to love the one that is really hard for us to love. And then he tells us the rewards that we will receive for doing these things, that we will be forgiven, that we will be pardoned, that we will be born to eternal life. And so I'd like to suggest as an invitation to you that you maybe reflect upon the words to this prayer and you pick just one of the phrases. Let me go back. Just one of them, and let that be the thing you choose to practice for a while. Whether it is the phrase where there is hatred, let me sow love, or the phrase where there is doubt, faith, where there is despair, hope, where there is injury, pardon, where there is darkness, light, where there is sadness, joy. Pick maybe one of those, or pick that you're going to practice to be rather than to be understood, to understand, rather than to be loved, to love, rather than to receive, to be giving. Pick one of these and let it be your simple but deep practice until you feel like you've mastered it. Give it some thought. Namaste and God bless.